I've lived with my husband, Alex, in a cozy two-bedroom apartment above his brother's garage for 3 years. We have a 25-year-old Honda Civic EX, which we lovingly refer to as Bertha, and it still runs without any issues after being serviced at the local Toyota dealership last year. My mother-in-law, Carol, sends me weekly care packages with fresh, baked cookies from the Sunflower Bakery in town. She's always reminding me to take care of myself and asks about our plans for a family vacation every time we visit her in July. Alex and I have been married for 4 years now, and it's a good life. Or so I thought. We've all taken the 23andMe DNA test, and my results came back last week, showing a surprising match, a second cousin, which is unusual, but not unheard of. But there's one person who doesn't match, and her name is Patricia. I don't recognize the name, and Alex says he's never heard of her either. I started to feel a sense of unease when I received an email from an unknown sender asking if I knew anything about Patricia. It was late at night, and Alex was already asleep, so I just deleted it and went to bed. But now, the thought is stuck in my head, and I should have kept locking it. I started checking my email again, feeling a sense of unease, and that's when I saw it, a message from an unknown sender, asking if I knew anything about Patricia. The email was sent at 7 p.m. on a Tuesday, and the subject line just said, Patricia. I didn't think much of it at first, but now that I think back, I remember seeing an unfamiliar email address in my inbox earlier that night. It was around 9 p.m., and I had just finished watching a TV show on Netflix, the latest season of Stranger Things, on my 49-inch Samsung Smart TV. I hadn't noticed anything out of the ordinary, but now I wonder if I might have missed something. The email from Patricia's sender said they wanted to talk to me about something important, and that they had sent me a package. I didn't think much of it, but now I'm starting to get that nagging feeling that something is off. I try to shake it off, telling myself it's just spam, but the thought lingers in my head. I started to investigate further, and that's when I noticed something strange. My mother-in-law, Carol, was asking me more questions than usual about my family history. She would ask me about my grandparents, my aunts and uncles, and even my great-aunts and great-uncles. I had always assumed it was just small talk, but now I'm not so sure. I started keeping a list of all the relatives she asked about, and I noticed that she always seemed to know more about them than I did. I started to feel like she was hiding something from me. I went to the local library and looked up old newspapers and town records, hoping to find some information about Patricia. I spent hours sifting through dusty archives and scanning microfiche, but I couldn't find anything that seemed relevant. I decided to try a different approach and started searching online for any mentions of Patricia's name. I scrolled through social media, online forums, and even obituaries, but there was nothing. I began to feel like I was getting nowhere, but then I stumbled upon something, an old yearbook from my high school that mentioned Patricia as a teacher. I remembered her, but I had never thought much of it at the time. Now, I'm not so sure. I started to wonder if Patricia might have been more involved in my life than I initially thought. I decided to pay a visit to the old high school and see if anyone remembered Patricia. As I walked through the empty hallways, I couldn't help but feel a sense of unease. I stopped by the principal's office and asked if they had any records or photos of Patricia from her time at the school. The secretary looked at me quizzically and said she would have to check the archives. I waited for what felt like an eternity, pacing back and forth in the office, before the secretary finally came back with a dusty old file. She handed it to me, and I began to flip through the pages. Inside, I found a photo of Patricia standing in front of a classroom, smiling at the camera. It was dated 1992, the same year I graduated from high school. I felt a shiver run down my spine as I stared at the photo. Who was this woman? And why did she seem to be connected to me? I started to wonder if Patricia might have been more than just a distant relative. Maybe she was someone who had been hiding in plain sight all along. I stared at the old yearbook photo, and then my eyes landed on a name: Patricia, class of '87. Her face was circled in red with an arrow pointing to her photo, the same arrow that was also pointed at my own photo, taken in '92. As I stared at the old yearbook photo, I felt a chill run down my spine. Patricia's face was circled in red with an arrow pointing to her photo, and another arrow pointed at my own photo, taken in '92. I remembered now why my mother-in-law, Carol, had been asking me so many questions about our family history. It wasn't just small talk, she was trying to gauge my reaction to the truths. The care packages with fresh, baked cookies from the Sunflower Bakery in town. They were more than just a thoughtful gesture. They were a way for her to keep an eye on me, to make sure I didn't dig too deep. And the 23andMe DNA test results, she must have known about Patricia's true identity all along. I felt a wave of anger and betrayal wash over me as I realized that my mother-in-law had been hiding this secret from me for years. The truth was that Patricia wasn't just a distant relative, but a woman who had been part of our family for decades, living in the shadows. I finally worked up the courage to confront my mother-in-law, Carol, about her secrets. I asked her why she had been keeping the truth from me, and she broke down in tears, confessing that she had been trying to protect me from the scandal. She told me that Patricia was indeed a woman who had lived in our family for decades, but no one knew the truth about her past. Carol had been trying to keep it under wraps, but I think she felt guilty for not being more open with me. The care packages and 23andMe DNA test results were all part of her attempt to keep an eye on me and make sure I didn't dig too deep. I was shocked, but also relieved that the truth was finally out. I decided to forgive Carol and move forward, but I also made it clear that I expected honesty from now on. We worked through our issues in family therapy, and I started to rebuild trust with my husband, Alex. It was a difficult process, but I'm grateful for the strength we all gained from facing the truth together. As I looked at the old yearbook photo of Patricia, I realized that sometimes secrets are kept out of love, but honesty is always the best policy in the end. I'm a social media influencer, known for my outspoken opinions and harsh critiques of people I deem hypocritical. My brand has built a following of over 1 million people, mostly young women who look up to me as a voice of truth. Last week, I landed a major sponsorship deal with a popular clothing brand, and I'm set to announce it on social media tomorrow. But today, something strange happened. I received an anonymous package with every single receipt from my past 5 years of public life. Receipts for everything from flights to hotel rooms to dining expenses. The kicker: every single transaction listed was accompanied by a note detailing the hypocrisy of my actions. For example, one receipt showed me attending a sustainable fashion event while wearing a designer outfit that costs thousands of dollars. Another receipt showed me lecturing about the importance of recycling while being photographed with a single-use plastic water bottle. I'm starting to feel a sense of unease as I scroll through these receipts. Who could have put all this together, and what do they plan to do with it? I'm scrolling through my social media feed when I notice a comment from a user named Skeptical Sarah, asking if I've seen the receipts that just dropped on Reddit. My heart skips a beat as I click on the link, and I'm taken to a thread filled with screenshots of my past purchases. They're not just any purchases. They're receipts from my favorite clothing store, Forever 21, detailing the exact items I bought and how much I spent. I remember that exact store trip like it was yesterday. I had just landed a major campaign with them and wanted to make a good impression. But what really catches my eye is the timestamp on each receipt. They're all from different dates, but every single one shows me buying clothes that are either wildly expensive or completely contradictory to my sustainable lifestyle. The comment section is filled with users calling me out for hypocrisy, and I start to feel a sense of unease as I realize that someone has been digging through my past purchases. I'm still reeling from the comment thread on Reddit, where users are calling me out for hypocrisy. I scroll through the receipts again, trying to make sense of it all. One transaction in particular catches my eye: a purchase from a high-end boutique, where I bought a $5,000 designer gown for a photo shoot. The note attached to the receipt reads, "You lectured about the importance of affordable fashion, but you're clearly above it." I feel a pang of guilt, remembering how I ranted about the excesses of the fashion industry just last week. I start keeping a list of all the receipts and notes, trying to identify any patterns or inconsistencies. As I scroll through my social media feed, I notice that several users are sharing similar receipts, all with notes highlighting my hypocrisy. One user, TruthTeller22, posts a screenshot of me wearing a 200 pair of sneakers while advocating for sustainable footwear. Another user, Savvy Shopper, shares a receipt showing me buying a Furs 1000 designer handbag just days after I posted a tutorial on how to make your own affordable accessories. I start to feel like I'm living in some kind of twisted nightmare. Who could be behind this? And why are they targeting me specifically? I try to remember if I've ever publicly criticized anyone who has since turned against me. I think back to a heated argument I had with a fellow influencer, Rachel, over a brand sponsorship deal. Could it be her? But why would she go to such lengths to sabotage my reputation? I decide to investigate further and start digging into my past public appearances. I research the events I've attended, the brands I've partnered with, and the people I've worked with. I come across an old article from a fashion magazine featuring me as one of the top 10 influencers to watch. But what catches my eye is the byline: photo credit, Rachel Lee Photography. I try to remember if I've ever worked with Rachel before, but I'm coming up blank. I make a note to look into Rachel's past work and see if she has any connections to me or my brand. As I continue scrolling through the receipts, I notice that several of them have a small notation in the corner: paid for by anonymous donor. I feel a chill run down my spine as I realize that someone is trying to send me a message. But it's not just about exposing my hypocrisy, it's about something more sinister. As I scrolled through the receipts, I noticed that every single purchase had a unique timestamp except for one. A transaction for my 25th birthday, exactly 10 years ago, with a note that read, "You celebrated your quarter-life crisis in style." But here's the thing: I've never told anyone about that party. As I continued to scroll through the receipts, one transaction in particular caught my eye: to purchase from a high-end boutique, where I bought a $5,000 designer gown for a photo shoot. The note attached to the receipt read, "You lectured about the importance of affordable fashion, but you're clearly above it." I felt a pang of guilt, remembering how I ranted about the excesses of the fashion industry just last week. But what really stood out was the timestamp on that transaction. It was dated exactly 10 years ago, around the time I had a falling out with Rachel, my former business partner. I remembered that argument vividly, and how we parted ways abruptly. I had thought we were on good terms, but looking back, I realize now that Rachel must have been working behind the scenes to sabotage my reputation all along. The receipts I had found earlier started to make sense now. It wasn't just about exposing my hypocrisy, but about revealing the extent of Rachel's betrayal. The notation, paid for by anonymous donor, was actually a code, and when decoded, revealed Rachel's name as the mastermind behind the whole operation. I felt a chill run down my spine as I realized that Rachel had been manipulating me all along, using our past partnership to her advantage. The 200 sneakers I wore in that Instagram post, Rachel had paid for them as part of her plan to discredit me, and the 1,000 designer handbag. I decided to take a stand and expose Rachel's manipulation on social media, sharing the evidence I had gathered. The post went viral, and soon Rachel was bombarded with messages from concerned friends, family, and colleagues. I also reached out to my manager, who immediately terminated our partnership and issued a public statement distancing themselves from Rachel's actions. Rachel was eventually charged with harassment and cyberstalking, and she's currently facing a restraining order. As for me, I took some time to reflect on my own actions and the harm I had caused others through my hypocrisy. I realized that I had been so focused on building my brand that I had lost sight of what truly mattered, being genuine and authentic. I've since made a conscious effort to be more mindful of my words and actions, and I'm working on rebuilding trust with my audience. The experience was a tough lesson, but it's one that I'll carry with me for the rest of my life. I'm updating this post 2 weeks later to say that the fallout from exposing Rachel's manipulation has been intense. The original post got over 100,000 comments and shares, and I've since received countless messages from people who were affected by Rachel's actions. On a more practical note, the court date for Rachel's harassment and cyberstalking charges has been set for next month, and I've been asked to testify as a witness. My manager's team has also informed me that we'll be rebranding our company to better reflect our values of authenticity and integrity, which I'm proud to be a part of. As for me, I've been trying to take it one step at a time and focus on rebuilding my own relationships with my audience. It's a slow process, but I'm learning to be more patient and compassionate, and to trust that the right people will stick around when the storm passes. I've been living in my mother-in-law's house for 3 years, ever since my husband passed away suddenly. It was a 2015 Honda Civic he bought new that I still drive today. My mother-in-law, Margaret, has always been a bit particular about me. She'd call me every Sunday at 2 p.m. sharp to ask how I was doing, but our conversations would usually devolve into her complaining about something I'd done or said. The other day, we were discussing the new Costco warehouse going up on the outskirts of town. She's been ranting about how it'll bring down property values, when she dropped a bombshell. She'd been wrong about me all these years. I pressed her for what she meant, but she just muttered something about not being a good mother-in-law and hung up. It's been 3 days since the funeral, and I'm still trying to process what she said. I've been going through his stuff, sorting through old photos and mementos, and I stumbled upon an old receipt from 2018 for a storage unit at U-Haul. He never mentioned renting one to me, and I have no idea what's in there. I should have kept asking her questions. I was rummaging through my husband's old toolbox in the garage when I stumbled upon a small notebook belonging to him. It was a 2012 Moleskine, filled with notes and scribbles about our finances. As I flipped through the pages, one entry caught my eye: U-Haul storage unit, Unit 17, paid in full Yo Tukla 15's 18. I remembered asking him about it, but he just brushed it off as a work project. Now, I'm wondering if there's something he didn't want me to know. I checked the calendar on my fridge, and sure enough, he had left for work that morning on February 15th, but he never mentioned storing anything. The U-Haul logo is stuck in my head now, and I keep thinking about what could be in there. I tried calling the storage unit manager, but they're closed for the weekend. It's Saturday afternoon, and I'm stuck with more questions than answers. I've been trying to get my mother-in-law's house organized, sorting through old family photos and mementos. I stumbled upon a 2012 calendar belonging to her, and on the March 15th page, there's a handwritten note. A Bill's storage unit rent paid in full. I have no idea who Bill is or what this means. I showed the calendar to Margaret when she came over for dinner last night, but she just shook her head and said she didn't know anything about it. I decided to investigate further and checked my husband's old laptop, which he used to keep track of our finances. After digging through his email archives, I found a receipt from U-Haul dated February 15th, 2018, for a storage unit in Unit 17. The payment was made online using his credit card, but there's no record of what was stored in the unit. I tried calling the storage unit manager, but they're closed for the weekend. I started keeping a list of all the strange things that have happened since Margaret's admission. On Thursday, I found a box of my husband's old clothes in the garage with a note saying, "Don't forget these." I also discovered that his gym membership was still active, although he hadn't been to the gym in years. The other day, I received a package in the mail addressed to me, but it had my husband's return address on the label. I've been trying to piece together what might be going on, But everything seems to point to something much bigger than I initially thought. I started making phone calls to see if anyone knew anything about Bill or the storage unit. On Friday evening, I spoke with a neighbor who mentioned seeing Margaret talking to a strange man in a black SUV outside our house a few weeks ago. I've been doing some research online and found that there's a storage facility near our house that offers public access to their units. I'm thinking of going there on Monday to see if I can find any information about Unit 17. As I was going through my husband's old phone records, I found a text message from an unknown number dated last year. The message simply said, "Meet me at the storage unit at midnight." There's no number associated with the message, but it's definitely something I want to look into further. I'm starting to feel like I'm getting close to the truth, but every step forward seems to lead to more questions. I've been keeping a list of all the strange occurrences, and it's starting to look like a pattern is emerging. I just wish I knew what I was looking for. As I stared at the U-Haul storage unit door, I noticed it was slightly ajar as if someone had recently passed through it. I pushed it open further, and a faint scent of old books wafted out. I fumbled for my phone to call the manager, but my eyes landed on something that made my heart skip a beat: a small, leather, bound book with my name on it. The U-Haul storage unit door creaked open, and I stepped inside, my eyes adjusting to the dim light. The air was stale, with a faint scent of old books and dust. I fumbled for my phone to call the manager, but my gaze landed on a small, leather-bound book with my name embossed on it. As I picked it up, a piece of paper slipped out and fluttered to the ground. It was a receipt from U-Haul, dated February 15, 2018, for a storage unit in Unit 17. But what caught my attention was the handwritten note on the back. "For M, with love, B." My heart sank as I realized that the storage unit wasn't just for random stuff, it was for something much more personal. And the initials, B, meant one person: my husband. The pieces fell into place like a puzzle. The strange texts, the mysterious phone calls, the receipts, it all made sense now. My husband had been keeping a secret from me, and I finally knew what it was. I felt a wave of sadness wash over me as I realized that our relationship had been built on a lie. I stood outside the storage unit, still clutching the leather, bound book with my name on it. The truth finally made sense. My husband's secret was that he had been storing a journal for me, one he kept hidden away for years. I felt a wave of sadness wash over me as I realized what I had missed in our relationship. But as I looked down at the book, I saw something else: a handwritten note on the last page, addressed to me. "I'm sorry," it read. "I was trying to protect you." I smiled, feeling a sense of peace settle over me. My mother-in-law, Margaret, had finally acknowledged her mistakes and apologized for keeping me in the dark. She came out to my car that evening, tears streaming down her face. We hugged, and I told her I forgave her. The weight of our complicated history was lifted, and we both knew it was time to move forward. I wanted to follow up on my previous post as it's been getting a lot of attention and comments. It's surreal to see how many people have been affected by similar situations with their own mothers-in-law. Since my mother-in-law, Margaret, apologized and acknowledged her mistakes, we've been working on rebuilding our relationship. We actually had a court date scheduled for the storage unit and its contents, but it ended up being dismissed since Margaret agreed to return all personal belongings. It's still a process, but I'm trying to focus on moving forward and not letting past hurts define me. I've also started taking art classes again, something I put on hold during this entire ordeal, and it's been a great outlet for me. I've been going to therapy with Dr. Patel at her office in the Westside Medical Park building, near the Whole Foods Market on Wilshire Boulevard. My therapist has a kind smile and a soothing voice that always makes me feel comfortable. But lately, I've been feeling like something's off. She's been pushing me to explore my emotions in a way that feels almost manipulative. I try not to think about it too much, but the other day, I was browsing through my husband's old laptop and saw an email he had sent to Dr. Patel. It was a weird conversation about a new patient and how Dr. Patel was experimenting with a new approach to empathy. The subject line was, "Project E-Show?" I've been getting therapy with Dr. Patel for 3 years, but when I accidentally saw her notes online, they revealed she'd fabricated my entire diagnosis and treatment plan as an experiment in empathy manipulation. My husband has been acting really strange lately, and now I'm starting to wonder if he's in on it too. I should have kept going through the emails on his laptop. I was going through my husband's old laptop again, this time looking for any more emails related to Dr. Patel's mysterious Project EC Chow. I stumbled upon an email from Whole Foods Market on Wilshire Boulevard, where Dr. Patel had an account with them. The subject line read, "Delivery confirmation," and it was dated last Wednesday, just a few days ago. According to the email, Dr. Patel had ordered a bunch of random household items, including a new coffee maker and a set of wine glasses. What caught my eye was the part where it said, "Delivery instructions, leave package at doorstep with no signature required." I remembered that my husband had been getting weird packages in the mail lately, but I had just assumed it was some sort of mistake. Now I wasn't so sure. I decided to investigate further and started looking through the rest of Dr. Patel's emails on the laptop. That's when I saw a message from my husband to Dr. Patel dated yesterday. The subject line read, Project ECH Update. My heart started racing as I opened the email and read the contents. I've been going through my husband's old laptop again, and I stumbled upon an email from Whole Foods Market on Wilshire Boulevard. The subject line read, Delivery Confirmation, and it was dated last Wednesday, just a few days ago. According to the email, Dr. Patel had ordered a bunch of random household items, including a new coffee maker and a set of wine glasses. I remembered that my husband had been getting weird packages in the mail lately, but I had just assumed it was some sort of mistake. Now I wasn't so sure. I decided to investigate further and started looking through the rest of Dr. Patel's emails on the laptop. I found an email from my husband to Dr. Patel, dated yesterday. The subject line read, Project ECH Update. My heart started racing as I opened the email and read the contents. It seemed like he was reporting back to her about our therapy sessions, telling her how I was responding to her manipulations. I felt a cold sweat break out on my forehead as I realized that he might be in on it too. I started keeping a list of all the suspicious things I've noticed. A package arrived from Dr. Patel's office last week, with no return address and no indication of what was inside. My husband seemed nervous when I asked him about it, but just said it was something he ordered online. I also found an email from Dr. Patel to my husband, with a subject line that read, Patient Progress. She mentioned something about my emotional growth, and how I was responding positively to the exercises. I had no idea what she was talking about. I decided to do some digging on my own. I went to the DMV and pulled up Dr. Patel's license information. Her address listed was an office building on Ventura Boulevard, but when I looked up the building, it didn't seem to exist. I started to feel a sense of unease as I realized that she might be using a fake address. I also found an article online about a woman who claimed to have been a patient of Dr. Patel's. She wrote about how I stared at the delivery confirmation email on the laptop screen, my heart racing as I realized that Dr. Patel had ordered something to our house just yesterday. The package was scheduled for delivery in 30 minutes, and my husband was nowhere to be found. I rushed to the door, wondering if I'd finally caught them in the act. The delivery confirmation email on the laptop screen revealed the truth. Dr. Patel had ordered a package to our house just yesterday, and it was scheduled for delivery in 30 minutes. I felt a wave of dread wash over me as I realized that my husband must have been involved all along. The packages he'd been getting in the mail lately, the ones with no return address and no indication of what was inside, were probably from Dr. Patel too. My mind racing. I thought back to all the times my husband had been acting strange, always making excuses for his whereabouts or his phone calls. He'd been so eager to help me with my therapy sessions. He's always suggesting exercises and activities that seemed designed to manipulate me into revealing more about myself. It all made sense now. He was in on Dr. Patel's experiment, using me as a test subject to study empathy. I felt a cold sweat break out on my forehead as I realized the extent of their manipulation. The Project ECHO. Emails were just a cover, a way for them to document their twisted experiment and make it seem like something more. But what really caught my attention was the delivery address listed on the email, our house, with no indication that Dr. Patel had ever set foot inside. It was all a ruse, designed to make me think I was getting treatment when in reality I was just a pawn in their game. I felt a wave of anger and betrayal wash over me as I realized how far they'd gone to keep their experiment under wraps. The doorbell rang, and I knew it was the delivery person with the package from Dr. Patel. My heart racing, I wondered what other secrets lay hidden behind the facade of our seemingly ordinary lives. I decided to report Dr. Patel's experiment to the California Medical Board, and after reviewing my evidence, they immediately suspended her license. The police were called, and my husband was arrested for his involvement in the scam. He was charged with aiding and abetting a licensed professional in fraud, which carried a prison sentence of up to 5 years. I was finally free from the manipulation and control that Dr. Patel had exerted over me for so long. As I watched my husband being taken away in handcuffs, I felt a sense of relief wash over me. It was a weight lifted off my shoulders, like a dark cloud had parted, revealing the bright sunlight that had been hidden beneath. I realized that I had been living in a state of emotional numbness, trying to make sense of the world around me, but now I could finally start to heal and move forward. I'm still trying to wrap my head around everything that's happened. This post got over 200,000 views and comments from all over the world, and I've been getting messages from people who claim to have had similar experiences with Dr. Patel. The California Medical Board has announced that they will be conducting a full investigation into her practice, and I've been asked to testify against my husband in court. It's all happening very quickly, and I'm trying to stay focused. I just got word that the court date has been set for 6 weeks from now, and I'll need to prepare myself for what's sure to be a grueling experience. As I look back on everything that's transpired, I'm reminded of the darkness that existed beneath the surface, but also of the resilience and strength that I never knew I possessed. I'm Emily, a 32-year-old marketing manager living with my husband, Ryan, in a cozy 2-bedroom condo in downtown Denver. We moved here 3 years ago to be closer to the city's best craft breweries and restaurants. Our accountant, Michael Chen has been handling our taxes since we got married. He's always been reliable and his firm, Greenfield Accounting, has a great reputation. Last week, Michael called me in a panic, saying that the IRS had flagged our returns for the past 3 years for consistencies. He assured me it was just a routine audit and promised to explain everything when we met at his office the next day. As I hung up, I couldn't shake off the feeling that something was off. When we arrived at his office, Michael seemed nervous, glancing around the room before leaning in close to whisper that he had some bad news. His voice trembled as he handed me a folder full of papers with our tax returns highlighted and annotated. I felt a chill run down my spine as I scanned the pages, my mind racing with questions. I should have asked him more about those charity donations, but I'm still waiting for that conversation. As I scanned the pages of our tax returns, my eyes landed on a donation to a charity called Bright Horizons, with a large checkmark next to it. The date stamp said the donation was made 3 years ago, around the same time we started moving forward on our condo renovations. I remembered Ryan mentioning that he donated to them in the past, but I had no idea how much or when. The amount listed was substantial, the $20,000, and I felt a knot form in my stomach as I wondered why Michael hadn't mentioned it before. According to the notes, the donation was in kind and had been claimed as a business expense by Greenfield Accounting. I squinted at the fine print, wondering if this was some kind of error or miscommunication. I turned the page, but my mind kept drifting back to that large donation. What business did Bright Horizons have with our accountant? I started going over the numbers, trying to understand how much of our joint income had been diverted to these charity donations. I used my spreadsheet program to recreate our budget from the past 3 years, looking for any inconsistencies that might explain why Michael hadn't mentioned these large donations before. Ryan was working late nights at his startup, and I was home alone most evenings, trying to make sense of it all. I pored over our bank statements, searching for any sign of suspicious activity. The Bright Horizons donations kept popping up in my research, but every time I tried to dig deeper, the trail went cold. I had not changed my spending habits or our household budget, and yet our taxes were showing discrepancies. I started keeping a list of everything I found, noting the dates and amounts of the questionable transactions. I spent hours on the phone with Michael, trying to get him to explain what was going on, but he kept evading my questions. He said he was looking into it and would get back to me soon. But every time we spoke, I sensed a nervousness in his voice that made me wonder if he was hiding something. I asked Ryan if he knew anything about the donations, but he swore he had no knowledge of them. He told me to calm down and trust our accountant. But as I continued to investigate, I found more and more evidence pointing to a large-scale embezzlement scheme. I discovered that Michael's firm was being paid by Bright Horizons for consulting services, a company we'd never heard of before. The name kept popping up in my research, but every time I tried to look into it, the website was down or the phone number wasn't in service. I decided to do some digging on my own, using public records and online directories to see if I could uncover more information about Bright Horizons. I spent hours poring over documents, searching for any connection between Michael's firm and our joint tax returns. I stared at the computer screen, my heart racing as I scrolled through the records. Every charity donation to Bright Horizons was listed in our joint account, but the dates and amounts didn't match. And then I saw a single transaction, $50,000, deposited into our account on the exact day Ryan and I bought our condo 3 years ago. As I stared at the computer screen, my heart racing, I scrolled through the records again, this time with a newfound sense of urgency. The single transaction of $50,000 deposited into our account on the exact day Ryan and I bought our condo 3 years ago now made sense. It was a down payment, but not for the condo. I remembered Ryan mentioning that he'd been approached by Bright Horizons to buy a commercial property in the area, and how he'd been considering it as a possible investment opportunity. I had assumed it was just a side hustle, something he didn't want to talk about. But now, I realized he had been using our joint account to secretly fund his own business venture, and Michael had been claiming it as a charity donation to cover the tracks. The Bright Horizons logo on the condo's visitor badge, the way Ryan would often mention their community outreach programs, it all made sense now. He had been embezzling from our joint account, using our money to fund his own business, and Michael had been covering it up. I felt a wave of nausea wash over me as I realized how many times I had questioned Ryan about the condo's renovations, only to be reassured that everything was fine. But it wasn't fine. It was a lie built on top of another lie. The condo we thought we owned was actually just a loan, secured by our joint accounts, which Ryan had been secretly draining for his own gain. I felt a cold sweat break out on my forehead as I realized the true extent of Ryan's deceit. I sat in stunned silence as I stared at the computer screen, my mind reeling with the revelation that Ryan had been embezzling from our joint account. I felt a wave of nausea wash over me as I realized how many times I had trusted him and believed his lies. But as I collected my thoughts, I knew I had to take action. I immediately contacted the authorities and reported the embezzlement scheme. The IRS launched an investigation, and after weeks of digging, They uncovered a trail of financial discrepancies that led back to Greenfield Accounting and Bright Horizons. Michael Chen was arrested and charged with multiple counts of embezzlement and money laundering. Ryan, too, was charged with embezzlement and breach of fiduciary duty for using our joint account to fund his own business venture. As I watched the news unfold, I felt a mix of emotions: anger, sadness, but also a sense of relief that justice was being served. I knew it wouldn't bring back the money we had lost or restore my trust in Ryan, but it was a step towards healing and rebuilding. I started attending therapy sessions to work through my feelings and regain control over my life. As I looked out at the condo we once thought we owned, now facing foreclosure due to Ryan's actions, I knew it was time for me to move forward, one step at a time. I'm a 32-year-old marketing specialist living in the suburbs of Chicago, where I share a 2-bedroom house with my husband, Mike. We've been married for 5 years and love our quiet life in Oak Park. Our neighborhood is filled with young families and couples who all seem to know each other's names. On Wednesdays, I do my weekly grocery shopping at Trader Joe's on Harrison Street, and I always park my 2015 Honda Civic in the same spot near the entrance. Last week, as I was unloading my bags, a woman approached me with an unusual smile. She introduced herself as Sarah, and we chatted about the recent heat wave and the best brands of hummus. As we talked, I noticed that she seemed to be watching Mike's car parked outside our house, and I wondered if she might be a friend of his from high school. But when she turned back to me and said, "You don't remember me, do you?" I felt a shiver run down my spine. She took a deep breath and continued, "I'm your biological mother, and I've been searching for you for 25 years. As I stood in the Trader Joe's parking lot, Sarah continued to chat with me about our neighborhood and the local coffee shops. But then she mentioned my husband Mike's job at a small architecture firm in the West Loop, and how she had seen him present a project at a conference in Chicago last year. She remembered the exact date, October 15th. I was certain that Mike had never talked to her about his work, and I couldn't recall him attending any conferences in Chicago. I felt a surge of curiosity, but also a hint of unease. Sarah's words seemed almost rehearsed. I glanced at my watch and noticed it was 3:45 p.m., just as it always was when I did my Wednesday grocery shopping. The sun was setting over the rooftops, casting a warm orange glow over the parking lot. But as I looked back at Sarah, her smile seemed to falter for a split second, and I caught a glimpse of something else in her eyes, a flicker of recognition, perhaps, or a hint of something more sinister. As I stood in the Trader Joe's parking lot, Sarah continued to chat with me about our neighborhood and the local coffee shops. But then she mentioned my husband Mike's job at a small architecture firm in the West Loop, and how she had seen him present a project at a conference in Chicago last year. She remembered the exact date, October 15th. I was certain that Mike had never talked to her about his work, and I couldn't recall him attending any conferences in Chicago. I felt a surge of curiosity, but also a hint of unease. Sarah's words seemed almost rehearsed. I glanced at my watch and noticed it was 3:45 p.m., just as it always was when I did my Wednesday grocery shopping. The sun was setting over the rooftops, casting a warm orange glow over the parking lot. But as I looked back at Sarah, her smile seemed to falter for a split second, and I caught a glimpse of something else in her eyes, a flicker of recognition, perhaps, or a hint of something more sinister. When we said our goodbyes, Sarah handed me a small piece of paper with her phone number on it. I tucked it into my wallet, but couldn't shake the feeling that she was hiding something. As I unloaded my groceries and put them away in the pantry, I noticed a faint scent of vanilla lingering in the air. It wasn't a scent I associated with our neighborhood or even with Trader Joe's itself. I started keeping a list. On the first page, I wrote down every detail Sarah had mentioned about Mike's job and conference. I underlined the date, October 15th. I added notes about her demeanor, the way she seemed to be watching me, but also the way she faltered when I looked back at her. The next day, I called the architecture firm where Mike worked. They confirmed that Mike had attended a conference in Chicago last year, but when I asked for the exact date, they hesitated. "Let me check our records," the receptionist said. "It says here he was there on October 15th, but I'm not sure why it's marked with a symbol." I felt a shiver run down my spine. I stared at the calendar on my kitchen wall. Every Wednesday for the past 5 years, Mike had been working late, supposedly on a big project. But on October 15th, the day Sarah mentioned, he was supposed to be home by 5 p.m., yet his car is still parked outside our house, exactly as it is every Wednesday. As I stood in the Trader Joe's parking lot, Sarah's words kept echoing in my mind. "I'm your biological mother, and I've been searching for you for 25 years. But it was what she said next that made me feel like I'd been punched in the gut. "Your father was a professor at Northwestern University. He passed away 5 years ago, but before he died, he left me with a letter for you." The letter. It was dated October 15th, the same day Mike supposedly gave his conference presentation. A shiver ran down my spine as I remembered Sarah's eyes flickering when I looked back at her. She'd been hiding something. I called Northwestern University's Department of English, and they confirmed that my father had taught there for over a decade. They also confirmed that he had passed away 5 years ago. But when I asked about the letter, they hesitated. "Let me check our records." the receptionist said. It says here that your father left a letter for you, but it's marked with a confidential stamp. The same stamp was on the receipt of Mike's presentation at the conference in Chicago last year. Suddenly, the faint scent of vanilla in our pantry made sense. It was the same brand my mother used to buy when I was a child. I felt a wave of sadness wash over me as I realized that Sarah's story had been true all along. My father's letter. My mother's search for me and Mike's mysterious presentation at the conference were all connected in ways I couldn't have imagined. The Trader Joe's parking lot, with its warm orange glow, seemed to fade away as I pieced together the truth. As I stood in the Trader Joe's parking lot, I knew I had to confront Mike about Sarah's revelation. I called him at work, and he seemed evasive, claiming he had no idea what Sarah was talking about. But when I told him about the letter from my father, dated October 15th, and the mysterious presentation at the conference, his demeanor changed. He hung up on me. I went to the police station and filed a report, detailing everything Sarah had told me. The next day, Mike's car was impounded outside our house, and he was arrested for identity theft and mail fraud. The evidence against him was overwhelming: the letter from my father, the presentation at the conference, and the numerous emails he had exchanged with Sarah. As I watched him being led away in handcuffs, I felt a mix of emotions: sadness, anger, but also relief that the truth was finally out. I remembered the faint scent of vanilla in our pantry, and how it had always reminded me of my childhood. Now, it seemed like a bittersweet memory, a reminder of the love and deception that had shaped my life. I knew I would never go back to the way things were before, but I also knew I had finally found a measure of peace. 2 weeks later, I still can't believe the aftermath of that chance encounter at Trader Joe's. The post has gotten over 10 Zallowed comments and countless messages from people sharing their own stories of reunion and betrayal. The police investigation is ongoing, and Mike's court date was just set for 3 months from now. As for me, I've been thinking a lot about what Sarah said, that I have half-siblings out there who don't know me yet. It's a strange feeling, knowing I have this whole other family out there. Sometimes I find myself wondering if I'll ever get to meet them, or if it's better to just leave things as they are. For now, I'm just trying to process everything and focus on my own healing. I'm Sarah, a 32-year-old mom of 2 living in the suburbs with my husband, Tom, and our kids, Emily and Jack. We just moved into a cozy house on Elm Street, and I'm excited to start this new chapter of our lives. As I was unpacking boxes last week, I received a call from our genealogist, Rachel, who had been hired by Tom's aunt to research our family history for my grandkid's birthday. Rachel's been digging through old records and documents, and she sounded really excited about what she found. I walked into the kitchen, where Tom was making lunch, and overheard him talking to Emily about how cool it would be if we were related to royalty. I smiled, thinking about how this could be a fun family story to pass down. I've been meaning to sort through some old photos and documents in the attic, but haven't had a chance yet. I did take out my old high school yearbook last week, just to reminisce, and noticed that Rachel had highlighted a few names and dates in the back. I remembered that Tom's aunt had given us a box of family heirlooms when we moved in, including some old jewelry and a few antique items. Rachel mentioned something about an interesting coincidence involving one of these items, but didn't elaborate over the phone. As I poured myself a glass of water from the new water filter, I noticed that Tom was looking at me with a concerned expression. I asked him what was wrong, and he just shook his head and said, "Nothing." But I could tell something was off. I should have kept asking questions. As I poured myself a glass of water from the new Brita filter, I noticed that Tom was looking at me with a concerned expression. I asked him what was wrong, and he just shook his head and said, "Nothing." But I could tell something was off. I decided to make some lunch and headed into the kitchen, where I noticed the box of family heirlooms was still sitting on the counter. Rachel's research papers were scattered around it, and one piece of paper caught my eye: a receipt from the local antique store, Mrs. Jenkins Vintage Finds, dated last Thursday. The itemized list included a 14th century European coin, which I vaguely remembered Tom's aunt mentioning was part of the family collection. But what caught my attention was the handwritten note on the back of the receipt. Coin authenticity confirmed by expert, see attached report. There was no attached report, just a blank page. As I poured myself a glass of water from the new Brita filter, I noticed that Tom was looking at me with a concerned expression. I asked him what was wrong, and he just shook his head and said, "Nothing." But I could tell something was off. I decided to make some lunch and headed into the kitchen, where I noticed the box of family heirlooms was still sitting on the counter. Rachel's research papers were scattered around it, and one piece of paper caught my eye: a receipt from the local antique store, Mrs. Jenkins Vintage Finds, dated last Thursday. The itemized list included a 14th century European coin, which I vaguely remembered Tom's aunt mentioning was part of the family collection. But what caught my attention was the handwritten note on the back of the receipt. Coin authenticity confirmed by expert, see attached report. There was no attached report, just a blank page. I started keeping a list in my head, jotting down everything that seemed suspicious. Tom's aunt had been acting strangely lately, always making excuses to visit and help with unpacking. I remembered finding an old family Bible in the attic, and Rachel had mentioned something about it being a rare edition. But when I asked Tom if he knew anything about it, he just shrugged. I pulled out my phone and sent Rachel a text. "What's going on with the research? Is everything okay?" She responded almost immediately, saying she needed to discuss some technical details with me in person. I agreed to meet her at the local coffee shop after work. As I continued to tidy up the kitchen, I noticed that the coffee table was slightly dusty, which was unusual since we just cleaned it the day before. And on the TV stand, I saw a faint smudge of lipstick, Tom's aunt's signature shade. I felt a shiver run down my spine as I realized that someone had been in our house while we were out. I started to wonder if Rachel's research was more than just a coincidence. I asked Tom again if everything was okay, but he just gave me a reassuring hug and said, "Don't worry about it, honey." I wasn't buying it. I rummaged through the attic, searching for the old family Bible. It was nowhere to be found, but on the dusty shelf where it usually sat, I spotted a single, worn-out page with a faint inscription, "Property of House of Luxembourg." I felt like I'd stumbled into a time capsule, and my heart began to pound in my chest. As I looked at the worn-out page with the faint inscription, "Property of House of Luxembourg," a shiver ran down my spine. I remembered Rachel mentioning that Tom's aunt had been researching our family connections to ancient royalty. But I never thought it was more than just a fun story to pass down. Now, I realized that the antique coin, the rare Bible, and even the receipt from Mrs. Jenkins' vintage finds were all connected to this mysterious inscription. I recalled the smudge of lipstick on the TV stand, Tom's aunt's signature shade, and how Tom had been acting strangely when I asked him about it. Suddenly, everything made sense. The rival family seeking their birthright wasn't just a myth, it was real, and it was right in our own home. I thought back to the phone call with Rachel, where she mentioned technical details that needed discussing in person. It wasn't just about research, it was about verification. Verification of our connection to the House of Luxembourg. The family heirlooms, the antique store receipt, it all pointed to one thing. Tom's aunt had been trying to prove our connection to the rival family, using my family's history as leverage. I felt a wave of betrayal wash over me as I realized that Tom had been in on it all along. He had been pretending to be concerned about the research, all while knowing exactly what was going on. The photo of the coin on Rachel's research paper suddenly made sense. It was one of our family's treasures, used as evidence to prove our connection. And the handwriting on the receipt? Tom's writing style was unmistakable. I remembered the day we received the box of family heirlooms, and how Tom had seemed overly interested in the antique items. It wasn't just a coincidence, it was a setup. I met with Rachel, the genealogist, and we pieced together the evidence. It turned out that Tom's aunt had been using our family's history to try to prove our connection to the rival family, and Tom had been in on it all along. We went to the authorities, and they arrested Tom's aunt for forgery and identity theft. Tom was given a chance to come clean, and he chose to cooperate with the investigation. The antique store, Mrs. Jenkins' Vintage Finds, was shut down for selling counterfeit goods. I couldn't help but think about the lipstick smudge on the TV stand. It was a small detail, but it led us to the truth. I realized that my family's history wasn't just a fun story to pass down, it was real, and it had been manipulated by those who sought power and privilege. But I also saw how it could be used for good to uncover the truth, to bring justice to those who had been wronged. I wanted to follow up on my previous post about the shocking discovery of tampered genealogical research and the subsequent arrest of Tom's aunt. It's been 2 weeks since the story broke, and I've been blown away by the attention it's received, over 200 comments and shares on this subreddit alone. As a result, I've had a few family members reach out to me for the first time in years, and we're starting to reconnect. My sister, who was initially suspicious of Tom's aunt's involvement, has been going through some old family photos and found a cryptic letter that might be a lead on a larger conspiracy. The police have also asked to meet with us again to discuss potential further investigations. It's all still a bit surreal, but I'm trying to stay focused on the bigger picture, that our family's history is more than just a fun story, but a reminder that truth and justice can bring people together. I'm Emily, a 29-year-old podcaster living in the suburbs of Chicago. I've been recording a weekly true crime podcast for 3 years, and my latest episode is about to take an unexpected turn. My parents, Karen and Tom Harris, have always been tight-lipped about their past, but I've never suspected anything out of the ordinary. They're good people, hardworking and kind, and they've always been supportive of my endeavors. We live in a cozy 2-story house with a white picket fence in a quiet neighborhood called Oakdale. I drive a 2015 Honda Civic with a cracked rearview mirror that my dad fixed himself last summer. On Wednesday morning, I received an email from DNA Testing Services, a company I'd chosen for a fun podcast segment about ancestry and genetics. They informed me that my results were ready for pickup at their office in downtown Chicago. I decided to swing by on my way home from recording the episode, and that's when things got weird. I walked into the DNA Testing Services office in downtown Chicago, a small storefront between a Subway and a Starbucks on Congress Street. The receptionist, a friendly woman with a bright pink scarf, handed me an envelope with my name on it. I signed for it, feeling a mix of curiosity and annoyance at the interruption. Inside the envelope was a printed report with my DNA results. At first glance, everything looked normal. But then I saw a notation in small print that mentioned a conflict with my parents' genetic data marked as unverified. I felt a shiver run down my spine as I read the words again, my mind racing with questions. My dad's 20-year-old Honda Civic, which he'd driven to the office for the DNA test, was parked outside in the lot. It was a beautiful autumn morning, and the sun was shining through the storefront windows, but I couldn't shake off the feeling that something was off. As I walked out of the DNA testing services office, I couldn't shake off the feeling that something was off. I got into my 2015 Honda Civic and drove to the nearest coffee shop to collect my thoughts. The barista at Intelligentsia Coffee, a woman with a bright pink streak in her hair, greeted me with a friendly smile. I ordered a cappuccino and sat down by the window, staring at the printed report in my hands. I couldn't believe what I was seeing, a notation that my DNA didn't match my parents' genetic data. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. I started thinking about all the times my parents had been tight-lipped about their past. My mom would always change the subject whenever I brought up our family history. My dad would just shrug it off and say, "Don't worry about it, kiddo." But now it was starting to make sense. I thought back to our family vacation to Wisconsin Dells last summer. We'd been arguing in the car the whole way there, and I remembered my mom getting a call from someone on the phone. She'd excused herself for a few minutes, and when she came back, she seemed nervous. I decided to dig deeper and started searching online for any information about my parents' past. I Googled their names, but nothing seemed to come up. I tried searching for any records of them being involved in a missing persons case, but nothing matched. I felt a sense of unease growing inside me. What if I was right? What if my parents weren't who they claimed to be? I started keeping a list of all the inconsistencies I'd found so far. The list included things like the fact that my mom's name on the report didn't match her name on her driver's license, the weird notation on the DNA results, and the fact that my dad's 20-year-old Honda Civic had a different registration sticker than he claimed. I felt like I was uncovering a puzzle piece by piece. As I sat in the coffee shop, sipping my cold cappuccino, I started to feel a sense of determination. I was going to get to the bottom of this. I pulled up the family tree on my phone, and suddenly my parents' names were no longer next to mine. The lines connecting us had vanished, leaving only a blank space where my childhood should be. I stood in the empty hallway of my childhood home, staring at the DNA test results that had revealed a truth I'd never suspected. The conflict with my parents' genetic data was no anomaly, it was a deliberate deception. As I walked upstairs to our family room, memories flooded back. My dad's constant excuses when I asked about his past, my mom's hushed conversations on the phone, and the cryptic answers whenever I pressed for details. It all made sense now. The DNA test had uncovered a hidden history, one that wasn't mine. My parents were not my biological parents. They were Karen and Tom, the relatives who'd taken me in when I was just a toddler. The truth about my parents' disappearance still lingered, but now I knew why they'd chosen to raise me as their own. I recalled the small inconsistencies, the mismatched driver's licenses, the different registration sticker on my dad's Honda Civic, and the odd notation on the DNA report. It was all part of a carefully constructed cover-up. I felt a chill run down my spine as I gazed at the framed family photos on the mantel. My childhood, it turned out, had been a fabricated narrative, one that I'd unwittingly played along with for years. I drove back to my childhood home where my parents still lived. The DNA test results confirmed what I'd suspected: they weren't my biological parents. I stood in the empty hallway of my childhood home, staring at the family photos on the mantel. My mind reeled as I processed the truth. I recalled the countless times my mom had brushed off my questions about our family history. The mismatched driver's licenses, the different registration sticker on my dad's Honda Civic, it all made sense now. I felt a mix of emotions: anger, sadness, but also a sense of relief. I'd finally uncovered the truth. The authorities were notified, and they launched an investigation into Karen and Tom's actions. They were charged with conspiracy to commit identity fraud and were subsequently sentenced to community service and fines. As for me, I took time to grieve the loss of my childhood, but also to heal. I started therapy to process the trauma and began to rebuild my sense of identity. The experience had taught me that sometimes the greatest lies are the ones we tell ourselves, and that seeking truth can be a long and difficult journey. But it's one I'll always carry with me. I've been working as an assistant manager at the local branch of Smith & Co., a company my great-grandfather founded nearly a century ago. My family has been associated with the company for generations, and I'm expected to take over the business one day. My grandmother, who still sits on the board of directors, likes to remind me that I'm the fifth generation to work at Smith & Co. She's always telling me how proud she is of me and how much my great-grandfather would be if he were alive today. I try to listen politely, but it's hard not to feel suffocated by the weight of expectation. My boyfriend, Alex, thinks I'm crazy for giving up a chance at Harvard Business School to work at Smith & Co. He's always asking me why I don't just leave and do my own thing. but I know that would be difficult with my family's reputation on the line. I drive a 20-year-old Honda Civic with over 150,000 miles on it, and I usually grab breakfast at the Denny's on 5th Street. Last week, I had to drive to the nearest Apple store on 42nd Street to troubleshoot a problem with my laptop. The store manager, Karen, was really helpful and even offered me a free coffee from the cafe upstairs. As I was walking out, I saw a news article on a display screen that caught my eye. Smith & Co. was being investigated for price fixing by antitrust regulators. I should have kept locking my apartment door when I went out, because the truth is about to come crashing in. I was browsing through my email when I saw a notification from the Federal Trade Commission, FTC, asking me to confirm some information about my account. At first, I thought it was just a routine inquiry, but something about it felt off. The email mentioned that they were investigating a complaint about a company called Smith & Co., and that I might have information relevant to the case. I tried to recall if I had ever given them permission to contact me, but I couldn't remember anything specific. I decided to call the FTC hotline to ask some questions, and as I was waiting on hold, I noticed that my phone's battery was running low. I had been using it nonstop all day to browse through my social media feeds while grabbing coffee at Starbucks on my lunch break. When a representative finally picked up, I asked her about the email, and she told me that they had received a tip about Smith & Co.'s business practices from a former employee who was now working at a rival company, Procter & Gamble. I started going through my family's old business records, trying to find anything that might be related to the FTC investigation. My grandmother kept saying that Smith & Co. had always been above board, but I found some discrepancies in the financial reports from last year. The numbers just didn't add up, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I decided to look into it further, so I spent my lunch breaks browsing through old news articles about Smith & Co. on the company's own website. I stumbled upon an interview with our CEO, James Parker, from 3 years ago, where he talked about how Smith & Co. was committed to transparency and fair business practices. I printed out the article and put it in a folder labeled Investigation. The next day, while grabbing coffee at Starbucks on my lunch break, I overheard a conversation between two people talking about a shell company that Smith & Co. used to avoid paying taxes. I jotted down the name of the shell company and made a note to look into it further. As I was walking back to the office, I passed by the FedEx store on 3rd Street, where our company used to send packages. Now, they just use UPS. I remember our accountant, Mr. Jenkins, saying that it was cheaper to switch to UPS, but when I checked the old records, I saw that FedEx had actually been paying us a commission for every package they sent through our warehouse. I made another note in my folder. That evening, while watching TV on my couch, I saw an advertisement for Procter & Gamble's new laundry detergent. The announcer mentioned something about cleaning up the industry, and I wondered if it was related to our own investigations. I looked up the ingredients list online and found that one of the main components was a chemical that Smith & Co. had been using in our own detergents for years. I added this to my list of potential leads. The next morning, while driving to work in my Honda Civic, I saw a flyer on the windshield of the car next to me. It was an advertisement for a new, affordable laundry service that offered same-day pick, up, and delivery. The company was called Fresh Start, and when I looked it up online, I found that it was owned by none other than Procter & Gamble. I started feeling like I was getting close to something, but I couldn't quite put my finger on it. I decided to do some digging into Fresh Start's business practices, and what I found sent a chill down my spine. I pulled up the company's financial records from last year and noticed something peculiar. Every transaction involving Procter & Gamble was dated January 1st, exactly at 12:00 a.m. I counted 37 transactions in total, all with the identical timestamp. It looked like someone had manually edited the records to create a fake paper trail. I finally connected the dots between Procter & Gamble's new laundry detergent and our own business practices at Smith & Co. The identical timestamp on every transaction involving Procter & Gamble was more than just a coincidence. It was a pattern of deceit that went all the way to the top. I remembered the conversation I overheard at Starbucks about a shell company, used by Smith & Co., to avoid paying taxes, and how our accountant, Mr. Jenkins, had said it was cheaper to switch to UPS. But what he didn't tell me was that the commission we received from FedEx was actually a bribe to keep quiet about our own shady dealings. As I dug deeper, I found a trail of documents that revealed Smith & Co.'s price-fixing scheme went back years, with our CEO, James Parker, at the helm. The investigation by the Federal Trade Commission was not just about Smith & Co. It was about the entire laundry industry being controlled by a few powerful players who were willing to do whatever it took to stay on top. I remembered the advertisement for Fresh Start, the new, affordable laundry service owned by Procter & Gamble, and how it seemed suspicious at the time. But now I realized it was just a smokescreen to cover up their own involvement in the price-fixing scheme. I felt a wave of anger wash over me as I realized my family's reputation had been built on lies and deceptions. My grandmother's proud words about our company's commitment to transparency and fair business practices were nothing but empty rhetoric. I thought back to all the times I had felt suffocated by the weight of expectation, and how I had tried to fit in with my family's legacy. But now I knew that I had been living a lie, and it was time to expose the truth. The FTC's investigation led to a comprehensive audit of Smith & Co.'s business practices. Our CEO, James Parker, was charged with price fixing and bribery, and the company was fined $10 million. I felt a mix of emotions as I watched my family's reputation crumble, sadness for the harm caused, but also relief that justice had been served. I remembered the conversations with Alex, my boyfriend, where I had expressed my doubts about working at Smith & Co. He was right to encourage me to leave, and I finally found the courage to do so. I started a new job at a nonprofit organization focused on promoting transparency in business practices. As I looked back on the experience, I realized that I had been living in a bubble, unaware of the darkness beneath the surface of my family's empire. But I was determined to use this knowledge to make a positive impact. I drove my trusty Honda Civic to the nonprofit's office, feeling a sense of purpose and renewal. The Denny's on 5th Street was still my go-to breakfast spot, but now I savored each bite, grateful for the simple things in life. I'm a 4th grade teacher at Oakwood Elementary, one of the top schools in the district. My husband Alex and I have been married for 5 years, and we're expecting our first child together. We own a 20-year-old Honda Civic Hybrid that I affectionately refer to as Bertha. Every morning I grab a coffee from the Dunkin' Donuts on the corner and head to school, where I teach reading and language arts to a class of energetic 9-year-olds. My colleagues are all lovely, but I have to admit that I'm a bit intimidated by our school's principal, Mrs. Thompson, who seems to know every detail about every student's personal life. I've been teaching for 10 years now, and I thought I knew what to expect from a typical day at Oakwood, but today was different. As I was grading papers during my prep period, I overheard one of the other teachers mention something about the program and how it was being kept under wraps by the school administration. I didn't think much of it at first, but the way she spoke in hushed tones made me wonder if there was more to it than just a rumor. I've heard whispers about the program before, but I always brushed them off as mere gossip. Today, something felt off. As I was sipping my Dunkin' Donuts coffee during lunch, I overheard Mrs. Thompson whispering to the school counselor, Mr. Jenkins, about a situation with one of our former students. I couldn't make out what they were saying, but the way they looked around the cafeteria before leaning in closer made me feel like I was eavesdropping on a secret conversation. I tried to focus on my lunch, but my mind kept wandering back to it. When I got back to my classroom, I noticed that one of our school's usual sponsors, the local grocery store chain, Stop & Shop, had sent a donation request form for the school's annual fundraiser. The form was dated yesterday, and the check was made out to Oakwood Elementary. The program? I felt a shiver run down my spine as I stared at the words on the page. What did they mean by the program? I pushed the thought aside and tried to focus on lesson planning for the afternoon, but the phrase kept echoing in my mind. I decided to look into it further after class, but as I was packing up my things, I saw Mrs. Thompson glancing at me from across the room with a knowing look on her face. It sent a chill down my spine. I started keeping a list of unusual occurrences at school. The first entry was the donation request form from Stop & Shop with the check made out to the program. I had never seen anything like it before. On Monday, during recess, I noticed that one of our students' parents was taking pictures of our school's playground equipment with a camera that seemed to be angled towards the playground's entrance. I asked myself if it was just a coincidence or if there was something more sinister going on. On Tuesday, I overheard 2 teachers talking about an advanced training program that some students were participating in during their free periods. They mentioned something about evaluating and refining the students' skills, but they quickly changed the subject when I approached them. I started feeling like I was onto something big. During lunch on Wednesday, I saw one of our students' mothers lingering near the school's entrance, glancing around nervously as if she was waiting for someone. When I approached her to ask if she needed help finding something, she quickly excused herself and left the cafeteria. I couldn't help but feel like there was something she didn't want me to know. On Thursday, I received an email from the school's administration about a new educational initiative that would be implemented starting next semester. The email mentioned something about enhanced security measures and improved student performance, but it didn't specify what exactly these initiatives entailed. I started feeling like I was being kept in the dark. On Friday, during my prep period, I noticed that one of our students' backpacks had a strange symbol embroidered on the inside pocket. The symbol looked like a mix between a compass and a gear, and it seemed out of place among the usual logos and patches that students decorate their backpacks with. I started wondering if there was some sort of secret messaging system at play. As I was leaving school on Friday afternoon, I saw Mrs. Thompson standing near the entrance, talking to one of our students' parents. They seemed to be discussing something in hushed tones, and when they noticed me approaching, they quickly ended their conversation. I couldn't help but feel like I was missing something important. I was grading papers when I noticed Mrs. Thompson's eyes scanning the room, landing on my desk, and then darting back to the clock on the wall. Suddenly, the fluorescent lights above me flickered, and I felt a chill as she mouthed two words, "Meet me." The fluorescent lights above me flickered as Mrs. Thompson's eyes locked onto mine. I felt a chill run down my spine as she mouthed the words, "Meet me." I quickly gathered my things and followed her to the staff rooms, trying to compose myself. As we sat down at the table, she handed me a folder with a single sheet of paper inside. It was a newspaper clipping about an article on experimental educational programs, but the headline that caught my attention was, "Oakwood Elementary School accused of running secret operative training program." I felt like I had been punched in the gut. The article went on to explain that our school was part of a larger organization called Eclipse Initiative, which aimed to train children for high-stakes strategic operations. I remembered the strange symbol embroidered on our students' backpack. It was Eclipse Initiative's logo. I thought back to the donation request form from Stop and Shop and how the check was made out to Oakwood Elementary, the program. It all made sense now. I looked up at Mrs. Thompson, who seemed to be studying me intently. Her expression was unreadable, but I sensed a hint of pride behind her eyes. She leaned in closer and whispered, "You're part of it now, Emily. Welcome to Eclipse Initiative." The fluorescent lights above us flickered again, and I felt my world spinning out of control. I walked into the school's administration office, still trying to process everything I had learned. Mrs. Thompson and the school's superintendent were already there waiting for me. They had anticipated my reaction, it seemed. The superintendent handed me a folder containing documents that would lead to the Eclipse Initiative's dismantling. Mrs. Thompson was charged with obstruction of justice, while the superintendent faced allegations of perjury. The school was put on notice, and the district promised a thorough investigation into its involvement with Eclipse Initiative. As I left the office, I felt a sense of closure, knowing that I had uncovered the truth. My colleagues and I would need to rebuild our trust in the system, but we were determined to do so. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the experience lift off my shoulders. I thought about my own child's future and the schools they would attend. I made a mental note to stay vigilant, to always question authority when necessary. The fluorescent lights above me seemed to hum in approval as I walked out of the office, ready to face the next chapter in our community's story. 2 weeks have passed since my initial post, and I'm still trying to process everything that's happened. The post received an overwhelming amount of attention, with many of you sharing your own experiences and tips for staying vigilant in the face of corruption. I've been fielding comments from colleagues and even a few parents who claim to have had similar encounters with Eclipse Initiative. One development that stood out was a call from my sister-in-law, whose daughter's school was one of the ones involved in the Eclipse Initiative. She thanked me for speaking out and asked if she could help spread the word about our community's efforts to rebuild trust in the education system. I appreciated her enthusiasm, but also made it clear that this is a long-term effort that requires patience and perseverance. As I sit here reflecting on the past 2 weeks, I realize that uncovering the truth has only led to more questions about the extent of Eclipse Initiative's reach, about the motivations of those involved, and about our own complicity in allowing this to happen. I've been living with my husband Alex in a cozy 2-bedroom townhouse in the suburbs for 3 years. We spend most of our weekends driving his 2015 Honda Civic Hybrid to local antique stores and thrift shops in search of unique furniture pieces. Last Sunday, we visited Second Chance Furniture on Route 12, where we found an incredible 19th century armchair for a steal. The store owner, a kind old man named Dave, even offered us a discount when he saw the eager look on Alex's face. On our way back from the store, we stopped at the nearby coffee shop, the Daily Grind, and grabbed a coffee and pastry to go. I'm not even kidding, their iced coffee is the best in town. As we were driving home, I noticed that Alex seemed off. He was quiet, staring out the window with this far-off look on his face. I asked him if everything was okay, but he just shrugged it off and said he was fine. That's when I remembered the appointment we had scheduled for later that week with a new therapist my mother-in-law had recommended. She'd been dropping hints that Alex was dealing with some stuff from his childhood, but he'd never opened up about it to me. Now, as we pulled into our driveway, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to come out of this therapy session that would change everything. As we were driving home from Second Chance Furniture, I noticed that Alex's phone was blowing up with texts from an unknown number. He quickly silenced it and put it in his pockets, but I caught a glimpse of the screen. The word EMRGENCY was flashing on a message. At first, I thought nothing of it, but as we continued driving, he started to fidget in his seat and tap his fingers on the dashboard. I asked him if everything was okay, but he just muttered something about being fine and changed the subject. We stopped at the Daily Grind for coffee, and I noticed he didn't even order his usual iced coffee, instead opting for a plain black coffee. As we sipped our drinks, I glanced at his phone again. This time, it was ringing with the same unknown number. He quickly answered, and I heard a muffled voice on the other end. He quickly hung up and said he needed to make a quick call to his therapist. I raised an eyebrow at that we hadn't discussed anything about him seeing a therapist. As I continued to observe Alex's behavior, I started to notice that he was becoming increasingly withdrawn. We'd been married for 3 years, and I thought I knew him inside and out. But there were moments where he'd just zone out on me. At first, I chalked it up to stress from work, but now I wasn't so sure. On Tuesday, I saw him staring at his phone during a commercial break while we were watching TV. He quickly looked away when I caught him, and I didn't think much of it. But then, on Wednesday, I saw him typing on his laptop with his eyes closed, as if he was trying to recall a password without looking at the screens. I tried to talk to him about it, but he just brushed it off and said he was working on a project for work. I started keeping a list of all these incidents, trying to pinpoint any patterns or clues. I wrote down the exact time and date each event occurred, along with a brief description. On Thursday, I saw Alex sneak out of the house at 2 a.m. without telling me where he was going. He claimed he was just going for a walk to clear his head, but I knew that wasn't true. When he came back, his phone was dead, and he said he must have left it on the kitchen counter. But when I went to charge it, I realized he'd actually left it in his car. I decided to do some digging of my own. I looked up Alex's phone records and saw that he'd made a series of calls to an unknown number, all on the same day. The numbers were all different, but the time of each call was roughly the same 10 p.m. I felt a shiver run down my spine as I realized that these calls might be connected to the strange behavior I'd been witnessing. I asked Alex about the calls, but he claimed they were just work-related and denied making any calls to an unknown number. I wasn't buying it, and I decided to do some more investigating. I started by checking the phone records again, this time looking for any other patterns or inconsistencies. The therapist's eyes locked onto mine, and I felt my heart skip a beat as she spoke the words that would change everything. I've been working with Alex for weeks. But there's something you need to know about his alternate personality. The therapist's words hung in the air like a challenge. I felt my mind racing to connect the dots, but they were nowhere to be found. And then, it hit me, the text messages on Alex's phone that night at the daily grind. EMRGNCY? Flashing on the screen. He'd quickly silenced it and put it in his pocket. But what if it wasn't about work? What if it was about something more personal? I remembered how he'd fidgeted in his seats, tapping his fingers on the dashboard, and how he'd changed his usual iced coffee order that day. I felt a shiver run down my spine as I recalled the muffled voice on the other end of the call. It wasn't just work-related, it was something more. The therapist's eyes locked onto mine, and I knew I was about to hear something I'd never want to hear. I've been working with Alex for weeks, she said, her voice gentle but firm. But there's something you need to know about his alternate personality. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. Alternate personality. What did that even mean? The therapist leaned forward, her hands clasped together. He has multiple personalities, a condition known as dissociative identity disorder. It's a result of severe childhood trauma, and he's been working with me to manage it. I felt like I was floating above the room, watching myself react with horror and shock. How could I not have seen this? I sat in stunned silence as the therapist's words hung in the air, trying to process the revelation about Alex's alternate personality. The image of his fidgeting hands and muffled voice on the phone came back to me, and I felt a wave of guilt for not having seen the signs earlier. I thought about all the times he'd zoned out during conversations and how I'd brushed it off as stress or distractions. The therapist handed me a folder with more information on dissociative identity disorder, and I took it numbly. "We'll work together to help him manage it," she said gently. I nodded, still trying to wrap my head around the diagnosis. As we left the therapist's office, Alex walked beside me in silence, his eyes cast down. I took a deep breath and put my arm around him, trying to reassure him that everything would be okay. "We'll get through this together," I said softly. He looked up at me, and for a moment, I saw a glimmer of the person I thought I knew. The therapist had recommended counseling and medication to help manage his condition, and I was determined to support him every step of the way. As we walked out into the bright sunlight, I felt a sense of determination wash over me. We would face this together, as a team. I'm a 27-year-old marketing specialist living in the suburbs of Sacramento. My mom, Susan, is a free-spirited woman who always says what she wants, when she wants. She's been married to my stepdad, Mike, for over a decade now. But before that, she had a string of adventures that would put a travel writer to shame. One of her past loves was a guy named Alessandro, whom I met once at a family dinner party in Los Angeles. He was charismatic and charming, with a mischievous twinkle in his eye that made me wonder if he was trouble. My mom had told me that she'd lost touch with him after he went back to his home country. But it turned out she'd been exchanging letters with him all these years through a secret pen pal service. I found the correspondence hidden away in an old trunk in her attic, tied up with a faded ribbon and marked, "Do not open until I'm gone." The envelopes were from a company called International Exchange, and they'd been sending letters to her at our home address for over 20 years. It was weird enough that she'd kept this from me, but what really got my attention was the return address on the last letter, an orphanage in a small town in rural Italy. My mom had adopted a child from there. What did that even mean? I should have asked her more questions. I was rummaging through my mom's old trunk in the attic, searching for a family heirloom to give my stepdad as a gift, when I stumbled upon a stack of old letters tied with a faded ribbon. The return address on the last letter caught my eye: Orfanotrofio San Giovanni in Siena, Italy. I hadn't seen that name before, but something about it seemed familiar. I showed the letter to my mom, who was busy cooking dinner in the kitchen. She glanced at it quickly and said, "Oh, that's just a mistake. I must have written the wrong address." But as I looked closer at the envelope, I saw that it had been stamped with a specific date: January 10th, 2002. The same date was on every letter in the stack, all dated from different years but all sent to our home address. I felt a shiver run down my spine as I realized that these letters had been coming to our house for over 20 years, and my mom had never mentioned them to me before. I started keeping a list of every time my mom left the house for an extended period. At first, it was just a mental note: left at 9 a.m., returned at 5 p.m. But as the days went by, I found myself checking and rechecking the details. Was it always the same route she took? Did she stop anywhere unusual on her way back home? The list grew longer, filling an entire page in my notebook. I also began to notice that my mom was getting increasingly paranoid about our phone usage. She'd delete messages without reading them, and would often, accidentally, forward texts to the wrong numbers. One day, while she was out running errands, I decided to dig deeper. I logged into our household Wi-Fi and searched for any devices connected to the network. There was my laptop, my phone, and a single other device with an unfamiliar name: Alessandro's laptop. My heart skipped a beat as I realized that this must be some kind of evidence. I quickly screenshot the connection history and saved it to a secure folder on my laptop. When my mom returned home, I asked her about the laptop, but she just shrugged and said she must have borrowed it from someone. I pressed her for more information, but she changed the subject. I knew I was onto something. The next day, I decided to pay a visit to the Italian orphanage that had sent the letters. I searched online for any information about the place, but all I could find were vague descriptions and outdated reviews. I did manage to scrounge up an email address for the orphanage, however, and I sent a message asking if they had any records of my mom's adoption. The response came back quickly: "We do not have any record of an adoption involving your mother." I felt a chill run down my spine as I realized that something was very wrong. I started to wonder if my mom had been lying to me about everything. I began to investigate further, searching for any records or documents that might prove her claims. But every time I thought I was getting close to the truth, I'd hit a dead end. I found the old passport buried beneath the attic floorboards, and as I opened it, a Polaroid slipped out. It was a photo of my mother holding a small child with an uncanny resemblance to Alessandro's face, taken on the same date as the first letter from the orphanage. I stared at the Polaroid in my hand, my mind racing with the implications of what I was seeing. The photo showed my mother holding a small child with an uncanny resemblance to Alessandro's face. But it wasn't just the physical likeness that sent a chill down my spine, it was the date stamp on the back: January 10th, 2002, the same date as the first letter from the orphanage. Suddenly, the cryptic messages and coded language made sense. My mother hadn't been keeping secrets from me, she'd been keeping them from Alessandro. The child in the photo was his son, my half-brother. I remembered the stack of letters now. The way they were all dated from different years but shared a specific return address. It wasn't an orphanage that had sent them, it was Alessandro himself, trying to stay connected with his son through a secret pen pal service. I felt a wave of emotions wash over me: anger, sadness, and a deep sense of betrayal. Why had my mother kept this from me? And what did it mean for our family's history? The more I thought about it, the more I realized that everything I thought I knew about my family was a lie. I took a deep breath as I watched my mom being taken away by the authorities, her hands cuffed and her eyes downcast. It turned out that Alessandro's son was indeed her biological child, and she had been keeping him a secret from me for over 2 decades. The police found evidence of their secret correspondence in the old trunk in the attic, and my mom's actions were deemed to be child endangerment and obstruction of justice. I felt a mix of emotions as I watched her being led away: sadness, anger, but also a sense of relief that the truth was finally out. As I reflected on the past few days, I realized that I had been so focused on uncovering the truth that I had forgotten to take care of myself. I remembered the Polaroid photo and the way it had made me feel, like my whole world had been turned upside down. But as I looked at my mom's defeated expression, I felt a sense of calm wash over me. I knew that she would face the consequences of her actions, and that our family would be able to heal and move forward. I took a step back, feeling a sense of peace settle over me, like the warmth of a gentle spring morning. It's been 2 weeks since the news broke, and I'm still trying to process everything that's happened. The post got a lot of attention, with many of you commenting and sharing your own stories about family secrets. I wanted to update you on a few things. My mom's court date has been set for next month, and I've been preparing myself for what might happen. I also received a call from my aunt yesterday, who's been keeping her distance from our family for years due to the whole situation. She apologized for not being more supportive in the past and offered to be there for me during this time. As I reflect on everything that's transpired, I'm reminded of the Polaroid photo and the way it changed everything. It's funny how life can unfold in such unexpected ways, and yet, here I am, trying to make sense of it all.